In this section, we're going to look at how we can use SUMIF formulas to replicate summary tables, much like the ones we produced using pivot tables. Using SUMIFs to create your summary tables has some advantages over pivot tables. Because SUMIF tables will be formula tables, they will remain completely static, and it doesn't matter whether there's certain omissions from your data table. The table of formulas is not going to jump around in the same way that a pivot table might. So let's get started with this example. In our summary table, we might be interested in looking at two different variables at the same time. So I might be interested, for example, in the total value of sales by sales rep and also by item type. So to build up my table, the first thing I'm going to do is take each of the sales reps. I can simply type them in, Sorvino, Jones, and along the top I'm going to add some of those item categories, pencil and desk. From here I need to start building my SUMIFs formula. It is going to be a SUMIFs because I need to evaluate against two criteria at the same time. So let's start the sum formula, type that extra S and open my bracket. From here I need to stipulate the sum range. So move to the top of the column, Control Shift down, and here I'm going to do something that I didn't do before. I'm going to lock the cell range. Remembering back to previous videos, to lock a cell range I need to hit F4. F4 will apply those dollar signs to the formula range, and that means that when I drag the formula down or I drag the formula across, the range is not going to change. So why would that be important? Well, because if I drag to the left, for example, or the right, I need to make sure that the total sales column is always highlighted. And if I drag down, I don't want my sum range to drag down with it. Also, I might lose, for example, the calculation of these cells at the top. I want this sum range to be completely locked down. Okay, from here I type my comma and move on to the next range. It's going to be my criteria range. So the first thing I'm going to check against is the sales rep. So I move to the top of my sales rep column, Control Shift down, and again I don't want this criteria range to move around. The criteria range is always going to be in the same place. So whatever I do with my formula, I always want it to check the same range. I can now type my comma and move on to my criteria. In this case, and because I'm in this row, I need to pick this sales rep. At this point I'm going to leave my cell relative. I'm not going to lock the cell down, and in fact I may even just close my formula completely and study the behavior of that relative reference. So at this point I would be getting the total sales by sales rep and nothing else. I haven't included any criteria relating to pencil as yet. So with this cell reference I can now drag the formula down and I can see the totals updating for each one of my salespeople. In fact, I can do a quick check against my previous calculation, and my SUMIF against Jones in fact gives me that same SUMIF against Jones. So in this respect the formula is working correctly, but if I was to drag it to the right, I'm going to run into some errors, or simply omissions in this case, and that is because I'm losing sight of my criteria. Instead of my criteria pointing at Sorvino, it is now moving across the table with me. So I need to put a lock on that cell, and the lock I need to apply is a column lock. Therefore, I'm going to put my dollar sign in front of the column letter, in front of J. Let's just quickly test out this formula. I'm going to hit Enter, drag down to confirm it's still working as expected, and then if I drag across, I can see that it still maintains the reference to Sorvino in that first column. Okay, let's go back into our formula and add our other set of criteria, which is going to be the item type. First I need the criteria range, down to the bottom, hit F4 to lock that range, and then I can stipulate the criteria. Here I'm going to select my first criteria, in this case pencil. I'm not going to run through the experiments, but just simply use logic at this point. I know that when I move across the table, I want the criteria to change to the different item type. So if I move this way, I'll select pen set. That means I need my column to be unlocked. I'm not going to place a dollar sign. But as I move down the table, I need the reference to stay looking at this top row. The row always needs to be locked to the same number. That's going to be row 18. So I add my $sign. So now I have my two criteria ranges and my two criteria, which are set with partial relative referencing or partial locked referencing, however you want to look at it. Close my formula and hit enter. I can already see that number is reduced because I've now stipulated two criteria. So let's drag that formula down and then across. So now we can see in the different areas of the table that our formulas are working correctly. Our ranges are always fixed to the same place, and our criteria are always pointing to the correct areas of the table. And we can also use another little check and confirm that desks sold by Kivell does match up to our desks sold by Kivell calculation that we did earlier. Again, as discussed at the beginning of the video, this kind of tabular approach to finding summarized tables is a very robust way of presenting a static table. For example, where I may be missing data within a standard pivot table, some of these fields may be contracted. I may lose visibility of some of these columns if, for example, there had been no desk sales in this particular month. Now, in some regards, if there's no desk sales in this particular month, I might not need to see that column, but I would like to know that no desks were sold. If you were to use a pivot table, the desk column might end up completely hidden. But using formulas, we can see whether there's a blank cell or not. The table remains static. There are many other ways we can combine our SUMIFs, our COUNTIFs with this kind of tabular structure. So go ahead and experiment. Try different combinations that summarize the data that you're interested in, or try out some of the sample exercises accompanying this course.